I broke down the project car process in a previous video. One of the steps outlined was to clean up my rusty ass bumpers, and if you remember the video, this is a thing I was not looking forward to. In fact, I have been actively avoiding it. But it is time. It is the next thing on the schedule after first drive around the block, and actually I've driven it around the block twice and once a few miles down the road to the Peterson Auto Museum, where they were not totally impressed with my half-built car. So it is time for a full-built car. At least the exterior. It's time to put it all together, which does unfortunately include cleaning up those bumpers. We'll start by giving it a good wash. This won't matter because by the time we get it all together, there will have been so much dust and metal shavings kicked up in the air that the car will again be dirty, but we don't know that yet. Also, this gives me a good indication of how water resistant the car is to rain. Without any seals or proper drainage in the sunroof, you will not be surprised to find out that the interior is only slightly more protected from the elements than my Honda. So that was a nice brief waste of time before actually doing something about these guys. I'm not jazzed about this because I really don't like cleaning off rust. I don't love painting, and I hate it when fasteners are so rusted that they won't come off, and I guarantee every single nut on here has become one with the bolt it is attached to. Once I got them all off, I did a preliminary cleaning job of the cobwebs, dead leaves, and 70 years of God knows what. The actual bumpers had studs in them that were welded in from the back. They're not serviceable, you can't replace them, and while I did manage to get some of the nuts off without breaking the studs, I still don't want to reuse the studs. They're old, they're rusty, and they're not very strong. They're also that Whitworth thread that you can't get good quality nuts for, so I cut them off, drilled them out, and put in some rivet nuts. I love rivet nuts. The bumpers are held together with about 20 steel bars of varying sizes. They were all mostly rusted, so I spent a solid half day sanding and wire wheeling them to clean them before giving them a nice coat of epoxy primer. I also hit them with some spray paint to make sure they have a good coat, and I never have to do this again. It's starting to look like I'm running an unpermitted junkyard in my driveway. After the paint dried, assembly, which required a lot of looking back at pictures I had taken so I could figure out how it all went back together. I bought a bunch of 5/16" bolts and washers and lock nuts for this. By the way, it's kind of wild how much money I've spent on fasteners for this project. I mean, I have replaced nearly every nut and bolt on the car, but I went back and looked at my orders from McMaster and I'm well into many hundreds of dollars just on fasteners. It's just all the little things. Anyway, bumpers together. I put the bumpers on the car before I tightened down all the bolts. I secured the bumpers to the car, and then I tightened all the bolts so that everything would line up. There's a lot of slop in this assembly. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to some of the bolts with the rear bumper on the car, so I had to take it back off and then tighten those and then reinstall it. So this thing originally came with a crank start. It had an electric starter, but you could also crank start it. This guy goes right here. The crank starter went through there. This is kind of cool, this grill, this part here, slides up out of the way. So you can stick it in there. There's a radiator there now, and no engine behind it, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, pretty sticky down there. So, bumpers are done. Forever. Never have to deal with them again. Unless I want to remove some of these dents. Maybe tweak this part back here. Might get them re-chromed. Damn it. I have to modify the rear fenders on this car. You see, I'm not just using the Tesla motor, I'm using the entire Tesla subframe with all the suspension, and it's wider than the Jag by a couple of inches on each side. Normally, I'd roll out the fenders or maybe throw some fender flares on it, but I can't do that because this Jag has wheel covers. They're actually called wheel spats. I don't know why it's a spat, but it is technically a spat. Anyway, the black spats are flat, so I can't pack the track in the back without a hack and a jack. And a welder. I could maybe narrow up the rear suspension. This was my first thought, and it's still a possibility, but I hate messing with suspension, especially multi-link suspension like the Tesla has in the rear. You change one thing and it affects a dozen other things. Plus, the nice thing about taking the whole subframe is that I not only get the suspension, I also get all of the development and durability work that Tesla has done on the suspension, which kind of goes out the window when I start cutting it up and welding it back together. So I'm just going to widen the rear fenders. The fender flange is basically perpendicular to the side of the car, so in theory I should be able to just weld on an extension and then bolt that extension to the body. I'm not sure this is the best idea, but a lot of times when I don't know what to do, I just pick something and do it. Then by the time I'm done, I know what I should have done and I just redo it. So we're going to weld on some extensions, paint them black, and then put them on the car and see how I feel about it. First thing I need to do is clean up the flange. Lots of years of water seeping into the fender welting and rusting the metal. It's very rusty and unfortunately very pitted.
Get pitted, so pitted.
So pitted. I need to plug up all the original holes. Fortunately, these were punched out, so they're all the same, except where they had to re-punch them. But in any case, I had some patch metal laser cut out by Send Cut Send that was the same size as the punch, so I don't have to cut out a bunch of ovals. Welding on this flange straight turned out to be harder than I thought.
Not good. Other places, great. Very not good.
I had to go back in and cut some slots to widen or narrow parts of it to get it straight.
Just squeeze it in. And that gap goes away. And now we're good. Hopefully. Really, I have to weld it and then check it again. Maybe I have to cut it again, but we're getting there. I painted them with some epoxy primer and bolted them to the car. These are bolted into some floating nuts that are mostly hidden. It would be a pain to replace all these nuts. I thought about drilling new holes and putting in rivet nuts. Well, it turns out that this old Whitworth thread, while it is different than a modern Imperial thread, it's actually really close to a metric M8 by 125 thread. So I just chased the threads with a tap and used metric bolts. Oh, I forgot the tire.
All in all, it turned out this was not the best idea. With all the pitting,
So pitted.
this area looks really bad and will need a lot of work. Also, my extensions don't really nicely mate with the contour of the body. I should have cut the fender along this edge here and then mounted the original flange back into the car. Then I could place the fender where I needed it to be and weld in a strip in the middle. I can actually still do this, or maybe I can just cut it here and make a whole new piece here, bolt that to the body, and then weld it while it's bolted to the body so I know it'll fit. Not a huge fan of welding on this car with the battery and drive unit installed. The electronics are sensitive, so I'll need to unplug everything. I don't know, whatever. This is a problem for future Matt. Like I said, sometimes when you don't know how to do something, the best thing is to just pick something and go. Now I have some ideas on how to do it again better. Overall, I do like the look of the widened fenders. I was afraid they would look goofy, but I think they look fine, at least from 10 feet away. I do need to modify the front fenders. I have to flare them out so they'll meet up with this edge here. Speaking of the front fenders, the front fenders need less work than the rears. Mostly I just have to install them, which was a bit of a chore itself since they're 10 feet long and weigh 700 pounds, give or take. I couldn't remember how the fender bolted to the frame. Does it go inside or outside the frame tabs? Does it bolt to this big hole or the smaller hole that someone apparently drilled because the big hole wasn't big enough? Fortunately, I made some YouTube videos that I could go back and look at. Oh, I see. Once I had it all in the car and started to bolt it together, I noticed I couldn't get all the fasteners in, which I thought was odd because I definitely had them all in to begin with. But then I remembered that I raised the body up off the frame about 3/4 of an inch to clear the battery modules, and while the rear of the fenders bolt to the body, the front bolts to the frame. So I had to re-drill new holes in the front to mount the fenders to the body at the right height. The treads on the side of these fenders were really bad. The original rubber had cracked and broken mostly off. I cut new rubber treads and installed them. I made sure to get some rubber that was rated for outdoor use that has some UV protection so I don't have to do this again soon. This outer chrome trim was originally riveted in, so I drilled out those rivets and I put in some screws instead so I can take this off easier in the future, which I will need to do when I flare out this fender to meet up with the rear. So this chrome piece has a track on the back, and it had these little nuts in there, and they're kind of like T-nuts. They like slide in there, and then they stay in place and they don't come out. But they got this weird shaped head that looks like somebody took a bolt and did a bunch of grinding to it. I don't really feel like taking a bolt and doing a bunch of grinding to it. So I bought some of these weld nuts, weld bolts, whatever. No, it's bolts. And they've got like basically a flat head. I just kind of threw one at the grinder and
ground 2 edges off, so it's kind of a little T now, and that works perfectly. So slides in, does its thing, and I get to get rid of more Whitworth fasteners because these things, actually all of these but this one, broke off while I was taking this off because they were so rusted. So we're gonna go to this 832, I think is what that is, and then I'll just drill through the rubber from the other side and then stick this guy on with the stud sticking down and hit some bolts on the backside. This turned out not to be a great idea since the thin heads on these didn't really keep them from spinning as I tried to bolt it all down, so I'll have to remake these, but they're fine for now. Another problem for future Matt. After that, I installed some new headlights. I always like new headlights on an old car, really sharpens it up. But now I have to do something about these yellowish fog lamps. Again, future Matt problem. I was thinking I might want to leave the hood off so people can see inside and see there's not an engine there, but I thought I'd put it on just to see what it looks like. It is buttoned up. It has the, oh my God, that looks so good with the hood. Oh yeah. Leave that bit open right there so you can see inside. Oh, that's perfect. Yes. Love it. Love those wheels. I don't care what anybody says. The next day, I drove it to a car show for electric cars. The last car show I went to, they put me up in the nosebleeds, but this one, they put me right up front and center. It was a good show, a good day, and I gotta say, I'm real happy with the way the car is turning out. There's a lot left to do, but so far it looks so good. Hey, if you liked the video, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, hit the like, just push all the buttons, all hail the algorithm. If you do all that, maybe I can afford a new engine for the Honda because this one doesn't work anymore.